If you were living in London's Soho district in the late 1960s, you might have seen them. David Jones, not yet calling himself Bowie, and Hermione Farthingale. Young, beautiful, in love, walking hand in hand down Carnaby Street, drinking tea in cheap cafes, going to theatre rehearsals together. Hermione was an actress and dancer. David was a musician, nobody had heard of yet. Together they formed a trio called Feathers, mime, dance and music. When Hermione took the stage, David would watch her, and the admiration in his eyes was noticed by everyone. "She's my muse," he told a friend. "I can't make music without her." But in June of 1969, everything changed. Hermione left a letter and was gone. David was devastated, so devastated that he almost quit music. But he didn't. Instead, he turned that pain into songs, and those songs made David Bowie a legend. Now, decades later, Hermione is speaking for the first time, and what she reveals isn't just a love story. It's a choice, a sacrifice, and perhaps music history's greatest what-if story. If this story moves you, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. In August of 1967, at a small theatre studio in London's Covent Garden area, 20-year-old David Jones was waiting for a rehearsal to begin. He hadn't yet started introducing himself as David Bowie, and his music career was completely uncertain. He'd released a few singles that had gone nowhere. To make money, he was doing commercials and working as an extra on television shows. But he still dreamed. He still believed that one day he'd be a big star. Among the young women joining the studio that period was Hermione Farthingale. She was 21, with long dark hair, graceful posture, and confident eyes that drew attention. She'd trained at the Royal Academy of Dancing and was performing in London's respected theatres. David and Hermione's meeting happened naturally in London's vibrant art scene. Over the following weeks, David and Hermione started spending time together. They'd walk through Soho's narrow streets, eat spaghetti at cheap Italian restaurants. David would play his songs for her, and Hermione would dance. There was a natural harmony between them. David's music, Hermione's movements. Lindsay Kemp, the famous mime artist and David's mentor, watched this relationship closely. In interviews years later, he spoke about how David and Hermione's collaboration was creatively inspiring, two young artists drawing inspiration from each other. In October 1967, David made a bold decision. He proposed a project to Hermione, forming a performance group together, a trio combining mime, dance and music. They called it Feathers. The third member was John Hutchinson, David's guitarist friend. During rehearsals, David began writing special songs for Hermione. Their first collaborative song, When I'm 5, was inspired by Hermione's childhood memories. In early 1968, Feathers started performing in London's small theatres and clubs. David sang and played guitar, Hermione danced, John accompanied. The performances were experimental, avant-garde, and perhaps too advanced for conservative London audiences of the time. The shows brought in very little money. Sometimes only 10 or 15 people would watch them. George Underwood, David's childhood friend who frequently visited them during this period, recalled years later how David and Hermione had a special harmony on stage. The two young artists had unique chemistry in their creative process, but this dreamlike partnership began colliding with practical realities. Feathers wasn't making money. David's record label, Deram Records, showed no interest in the group. Hermione's family, especially her mother, worried about this relationship. Being a musician was seen as an unstable career at the time, and Hermione's family was concerned about their daughter's future. By mid-1968, Feathers had dissolved. Financial pressure, lack of interest, and David's need to focus on his solo career ended the group. But David and Hermione's relationship continued. They now worked separately, but were still together. David continued writing songs for Hermione. An occasional dream was written during this period, a soft, melancholic piece. But things were starting to change. Hermione's family's concerns were growing. David's career was still uncertain. In late 1968, he wrote Space Oddity, but hadn't recorded it yet. There were still no signs of success. And Hermione slowly began asking questions about her own future. In late 1968, Hermione met a more established man in theatre circles. His identity remained private for years. Hermione chose to protect her personal life. But what's known is this. This person offered something David couldn't: stability and security. David was unaware of the situation. He was still making future plans with Hermione, writing songs for her. But Hermione was experiencing an internal conflict. Was love enough? An uncertain future with a bohemian artist, or a secure life? In May 1969, Hermione had to make a significant decision. There were two paths, and she couldn't choose both. By the end of May, she made her choice. She left David a written message, informing him she was ending the relationship. David received the message in the first week of June 1969. It was just days before he was scheduled to enter the studio to record Space Oddity. When he read it, his world collapsed. Close friends recall that David was deeply affected by this breakup, didn't leave his house for days, and was emotionally devastated. David's reaction was severe. In the first days, he ate very little, withdrew from social activities. His mother, Peggy Jones, worried about her son's condition and tried to support him. David always tried to appear strong, but this time he was truly broken. Tony Visconti, the producer David was working closely with at the time, recalled years later that David was deeply affected by the breakup. During studio work, it was clear David was still thinking about Hermione. Hermione's departure shattered David, but also triggered his creativity. Pain turned into song. Loneliness became lyrics. And during the Space Oddity recordings, David reflected that pain in the Major Tom character, the loneliness in space in ground control to Major Tom, could be a reflection of David's real emotional isolation. In July 1969, Space Oddity was released and slowly began climbing the charts. When Apollo 11 landed on the moon, the song reached its peak. David was suddenly famous. But the fame he gained didn't replace the love he'd lost. According to friends, he continued talking about Hermione for a long time. In August 1969, David did something significant. He wrote a song for Hermione. The song was called Letter to Hermione. The lyrics were an expression of longing. The hand that wrote this letter sweeps the pillow clean, so rest your head and read a treasured dream. David's attempt to reach Hermione was evident. Over the following years, David Bowie wrote many songs inspired by Hermione. Life on Mars, one of David's most famous songs, according to some Bowie researchers, contains reflections of his separation from Hermione's world. Some imagery in the song may recall Hermione. The Prettiest Star, recorded in 1970, reflected his admiration for Hermione. It was a musical expression of David's feelings for her. In 1971, David married Angela Barnett. Angie was strong, determined, and played an active role in advancing David's career. But in interviews years later, Angie said that David hadn't forgotten Hermione and would occasionally mention her. Even during the Ziggy Stardust period, David's songs contained themes of loss and loneliness. The emotional depth in pieces like 5 Years and Rock and Roll Suicide was fed by his personal experiences. Tony Visconti, after working with David for years, observed that there was a constant theme of loss and longing in David's music. These themes were connected to experiences in David's personal life. After leaving David, Hermione Farthingale completely disappeared from view. She married, took another name, and stayed away from David Bowie's world. She continued her theatre career but stayed out of the spotlight. She avoided the press and for years never spoke about David. As David became famous, journalists and fans tried to find Hermione. But Hermione maintained her silence. She gave no interviews, made no comments. She chose to protect her private life. David, however, continued talking about Hermione for years. In various interviews, he mentioned his first love. In the 1980s, he said he'd never forgotten his first real love. In the 1990s, he expressed that the pain of that separation had shaped him as an artist. But Hermione remained silent. Even when David died in 2016, she made no public statement. She chose to remain private. In the years following David's death, sources indicate that Hermione gave some interviews and recalled that period. She finally broke that long silence and spoke about the relationship. According to information Hermione shared, she loved David but worried about the future. David had very big dreams, and Hermione knew he would reach them, but she felt she wasn't ready for that journey. She wanted a stable life, and thought David's world was too uncertain for her. According to what Hermione shared, it was one of her most difficult decisions. The reason she left David wasn't that she didn't love him, but the opposite: she didn't want to harm him. Her family's pressure, her own future concerns, and the thought of not wanting to be an obstacle to David's career led to this decision. She said the person she married was a good person who provided security and stability, but she never loved anyone the way she loved David. First love is special, and David always remained her first true love. For years, Hermione avoided listening to the songs David wrote about her. It was too painful, but after David died, she gathered courage and listened to Letter to Hermione. The song deeply affected her because the David in it was the David she knew: fragile, sensitive, loving. She also shared her thoughts about life on Mars. She noticed that some references in the song might belong to her. She saw how much David's art was fed by personal experiences. One of Hermione's most emotional revelations was this: in the 1970s, when she saw David on television in his Ziggy Stardust costume, she realized he was a huge star. She felt proud but also sad, because that star was born without her. Maybe it was born because she wasn't there. According to what Hermione shared, she experienced mixed feelings. On one hand, regret because she couldn't spend more time with David. She didn't live that life. But on the other hand, she thought she did the right thing for both herself and David. Knowing that a large part of David's music came from her departure was a strange feeling, both painful and proud. David's genius was his ability to transform pain into art. The pain Hermione caused turned into beauty. Millions of people found strength and comfort in those songs. When David died, Hermione was very upset because they would never be able to talk. The opportunity to say certain things was lost forever. David Bowie, David's ex-wife, mentioned in interviews over the years that David couldn't forget Hermione. She said a corner of David's heart always belonged to her. Tony Visconti, producer and longtime friend, thinks Hermione's story is both tragic and beautiful. He notes that David's transformation of lost love into music was an artistic achievement. Hermione Farthingale's story teaches us this: sometimes loss is necessary for creation. Many of David Bowie's most iconic songs were born from that broken heart in June 1969. If Hermione had stayed, David would have been a different musician. Perhaps happier, but perhaps less profound. An Occasional Dream, Letter to Hermione, Life on Mars, The Prettiest Star, all carry Hermione's influence. Hermione physically left David's life, but continued living in his music. Every song a memory, every note a longing, every word an emotion. Hermione's sharing years later gave David Bowie fans a new perspective. Hermione was just a young, frightened woman. She'd made a difficult choice to protect herself and David, and that choice, paradoxically, became one of the foundations of David's artistic greatness. When you listen to Life on Mars today, you're not just hearing a song, you're hearing the echoes of Hermione and David's lost love. When Letter to Hermione plays, you feel a young man's longing, and when The Prettiest Star begins, you see an admiration that never faded. The story of Hermione Farthingale and David Bowie is an unfinished love story. Two young people came together at the right time under the wrong circumstances. They created beautiful things together but didn't stay together. Hermione chose security, David chose art, and both lost something, but the loss wasn't in vain. David's pain transformed into music that touched generations. Hermione's choice made David a deeper, more complex artist, and in the end both tried to find peace in their own ways. Hermione lived a quiet life in England. David died in 2016 as a legend mourned by millions, but every time Life on Mars plays they reunite, in music, in memories, in the eternal echo of a lost love. Perhaps the most beautiful love stories are the unfinished ones, because they live forever in our imagination. Hermione and David's story is like that, painful, beautiful, and forever incomplete.